Morning, everybody. We have been in a conversation here called the energetic exchange, a prioritization of our well being. Part of this conversation came from me just asking you all how you're doing, and many of you responded with just full authenticity, transparency. You said you're exhausted, said you're tired. Some of you talked about being burnt out, wearing too many hats. And we thought it would be foolish of us to not stop, pause, and start asking some questions. Why are we tired? And many of you immediately are like, I can tell you, I have a list of reasons. Number one, I live in the United States of America. Number two, I have children. Number three, I pay taxes, right? Like you have a list of reasons of why you are exhausted. And so what we've been doing is trying to create a moment of pause. And instead of just doing what our culture tells us, which is, keep grind, these words I keep hearing a lot. I'm just like, man, just grinding it out. God, that sounds exhausting. Let me just be honest. I don't want to live in a world where I have to just grind it out every day, right? I don't want a job where it feels like I'm suffering from 9 to 5. We need to pause. We need to ask questions. We need to interview our own fatigue. Because what we've learned is our fatigue is our body's way of communicating to us. If you've ever wanted to know how your soul speaks, one of the ways it speaks is through your emotions. And so if you're ever curious, hey, if I could put a microphone to the depths of my being, what would it say? It would say what it is you're feeling. The language of the soul is your emotions. And so we don't just continue to pull up the bootstraps and just grind it out and keep going. No, we stop. Because what we know is we've tried to keep going and it didn't work. And this is why we have an epidemic of people who are burnt out, strung out on so many drugs because we can't cope. We can't go on. And I would also argue this is by and large why a lot of us love caffeine. There is a reason the first thing you do in the morning is drink coffee. It's because you know you're going to need some kind of a boost, which can we all be honest about this? It is a drug, right? Now, it's the one that we're good with it, okay? Okay? But we need a boost, and here's why. Let's just pause, because we know what we're about to face in and of our own selves we can't do without some outside substance. Let me just pause. This isn't like judgmental, but that's kind of problematic. That's problematic. That says something that maybe what we're doing with our lives is actually not healthy. Maybe the work culture in America needs to be interviewed. Maybe it's not healthy. Maybe working as much as we are is not actually good for the soul. And so this is what we're doing. We're pausing. Now, we last week got into a particular man in the Old Testament because he had this big burnout experience. You probably know him. He's legendary in the Israelite world, and he's legendary in the Christian world. His name is Elijah. You've heard of this, right? Now, last week we started with Elijah, and Elijah, it's like folklore. I mean, he has this amazing moment on top of Mount Carmel, and he's calling out the king of Israel at the time and his wife Jezebel, and he's saying, you're committing injustice, and you are inviting people into idolatry. Repent. And then he has this showdown where he invites this Canaanite god Baal and the people that represent him, and they call down fire. If you missed all that, you can go back last week. But it's like this literal mountaintop experience he has. And then he comes down the mountain. And he's depressed. He's tired. He's fatigued. And so he makes his way back up to another mountain, finds a cave, goes inside, and essentially pauses and says, oh God, I'm the only one who sees the world the way I see the world. And everyone is messed up in their heads, in their psyche, in their soul, and no one sees that all of this is wrong. Now, let's pause here. Has anyone ever felt that way? Have you ever been like watching the news going, how is this normal? And honestly, if you had taken I'm 44 now, if you had taken my 8-year-old self and you had taken this self and you had taken my 8-year-old self and placed him in front of the news right now, I would have never imagined the normalization that is taking place in the last 40 years. Ooh, back in the day, the Republican Party would have never tolerated the things they're tolerating now. And as you start to wonder, where'd the slide come from? My evangelical upbringing, they used to talk to me about the slippery slope. That was such a big word. And they were always so concerned. They were like, Cody, we're just worried about the books you're reading. Well, what are you worried about, Mom? Well, I'm just worried that you're headed down a slippery slope. And that you know my story. That was my story. Slippery slope. If you want gateway drugs into the slip, I can give you a gateway drug. Andy Stanley was a gateway drug for me. Louis Giglio was a gateway drug for me. That's how I started. I started there. So I moved from Southern Baptist fundamentalism, and they were the first easy step because they were like contemporary but not really progressive. So it's like, oh, I can handle that. But then what I realized is my parents are talking about the slippery slope. They're actually kind of right. Because then I was like, yeah, but I have questions about this. Why don't you let gay people be baptized in your church? Because I like, that's problematic. So I have questions about this. And then I took another step. And then someone showed up and said, you ever heard of Brian McLaren? Here's his book. And I read it. And you want to talk about a slippery slope. I went whoop all the way down. And then at some point, they're like, ever heard of Rob Bell? I'm like, no, there is no hell. Bring it to me, right? Yeah, you know the story, right? And turns out I slid down. Now, a couple things. One, I'm actually grateful I took the slide because what I realized was I was standing on the wrong slope. And then second, I will tell you this. The one thing evangelicals never discussed was that the slope runs both ways. So I slid down into a love that I never knew was possible, and I'm grateful I slid because turns out the love of the divine is much wider than I ever imagined. And there's far more liberation, far more freedom, far more inclusivity. Oh, it's beautiful. And everybody's welcome. Come on. Come on down the slide. Now, what they did not tell me is that the slope runs the other way. No one ever said growing up in Buffalo, Minnesota, that no one ever paused to say, hey, have you ever considered that Fox News is a slippery slope? And you're sliding right down into patriarchy, misogyny. You're sliding right down into fascism. You're sliding right down into what it is you have today. Yeah. You're dismissed. Now, all of that said, this is why it's critical when you have these conversations. You talk about burnout, tired, everything that's happening right now. We need to pause and ask really good questions. Questions like, what is what we are reading? What is it producing in our lives? This intake from the news, what is it actually doing to our bodies? Yes, it's important. I try to do everything I can with intentionality. I don't want to just give my attention to something without pausing, going, how is this affecting me? So we looked at Elijah, and Elijah had this great experience, and now he's in this cave, and he's like, God, I feel like I'm the only person. And many of you can relate to that. Right now, Katie and I talk about this all the time, but it feels like we live in the upside down. And I'm going, how are people not seeing this? And then here's where I get really cynical. Can we just get real transparent? Sometimes I think they do see it, they just don't care. And then I'm like, oh, what's happening to you, Cody? Because then the only thing I want to go do is drink bourbon and cry. And then if you're not careful, you become one of those guys just at the bar sipping bourbon going, it's all ruined. It's all going to hell in a handbasket, so we might as well party until the apocalypse arrives. But I don't want to give up, you know what I mean? I don't want to give up. I mean, I want to sip a bourbon, but I want it to fuel me to keep changing the world. Yeah. So that's in large part where we are. And sometimes it does feel like we're the only ones. Now, what you're going to find in this story is, if you're not careful, you can become a little bit self-righteous, thinking you're the only one who's got it figured out. And I think that's a warning. Chelsea was really helpful with me that week. Last week, we talked a little bit about, after the talk, we talked a little bit about Elijah. And I think that is such a pivotal key thing that she shared with me, which is part of the reason he was so drained is because he bought into the lie he was the only one. And that he was the only one responsible to save the world. Friends, if you are bearing the weight of saving the world, you're already done. It's too much. You can't do that alone. That's why we gather. And what I want you to know is you're not alone. There are far more people than you ever realize. You may just not be able to see them right now. Part of our task as a collective is to connect them because they don't just live in California. They're here. You might be surprised. They might be your neighbor, but they don't have the flag out because they get tortured when they have it out. They might be right beside you. They might be, check this out, in a church that looks like a Baptist church. It's a steeple. Check it out. Not downtown where all the liberals are, but in Mableton. Yeah. People are like, build a new building. No, we're undercover here. I don't want authorities to know we're here. You know what I mean? People, we're doing this when people ride by, they're like, stay away from that fundamentalist church. Yes. Yes. So here's what I want to do. I want to read, I want to continue. And some of you, if you've been around church or you grew up in church, you're probably really, really familiar with what I'm about to read to you. So I'm going to read this to you. But this is the continuation of Elijah. Remember, he goes up the cave, he's burnt out. And then he literally is so tired. He's like, I'm the only one. And then he says, God, just kill me, right? Like that's, by the way, that's depression. I heard Jim Carrey, the actor, say this week. I heard Jim Carrey say this week, and I love it. He said that word depression, he said you could read it this way. Deep rest. Deep rest. It's your body going, I need deep rest. Depressed, right? And I was like, who knew? Dumb and Dumber. All right, so he's actually a genius in my opinion. All right, 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 11. He said, now, who's the he? We're not sure. It just says the word of the Lord. That's why I want to pause because people always talk about God spoke to me. Okay, well, take a breather. We're talking about God, all right? We're not talking about your mother-in-law. You said God spoke to you. That's a large, giant claim, all right? But how does God speak? It's been my experience that God speaks through the body, okay? God speaks in many ways, but it's been my experience that it's usually not the billboard. It's the nudge. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's the small, gentle nudge. Now, we're going to get there because this is what's happening. He said, go out, stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Now, there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting the mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle, went out, stood at the entrance of the gate. Then there came a voice to him. Did you hear that? Now I have questions, Elijah. How did that voice come? Then there came a voice to him. Have you heard voices? Am I the only one who hears voices? Some of y'all are like, yeah, someone said yes. Check this brother in. You know what I'm talking about? Then a voice came to him that said, oh, this is a great question. Apparently, in my opinion, it resides within him. What are you doing here, Elijah? That's the question. You ever found yourself somewhere and you're like, why am I here? Some of you are like, this morning. Okay. Verse 14. And he answered, I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. Or you could translate that, I'm a good Christian. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant. Evangelicals have abandoned your message. They've thrown down your altars and killed your prophets with a sword. And I love this. I am left alone. And now they're seeking to take my life, to take it away. Then the Lord said, go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. He gives him a new mission, and then he gives him clarity. You're not alone. It's as if God is an empath, but at the same time, sometimes he pulls us out of our melodrama and says, get over yourself. God, you're weeping and moaning about how awful the world is. Dude, you have no idea what I'm up to right now. If you think this president does not have to check into someone, do not believe that lie. It's almost like there needs to be moments where I stand going, yeah, there is a larger authority at play here. And sometimes you have to stand and believe it even when you don't see it. That's what faith is. It's what trust is. Yeah. Okay. Now, Elijah goes up to this mountain, and he goes up to the mountain. Think about it. All the noise is here. You go up to a place, a mountaintop, to get above what? The noise, the demands, and the obligations. He stops. He moves into a cave, which I think is metaphorical for like a womb-like security. And in the cave, his internal universe, deep within there, all right? So get that image. These writers know what they're doing. They're geniuses. They're playing with words here. The cave is this internal universe. He walks in. He goes inside his inner being, and he pauses, and he finds silence and solitude. And what he realizes is it's not the big windstorm, it's not the earthquake, and it's not the fire, but it's the silence where he begins to hear a voice speak. I want to pause here and just say this. It is essential to create regular moments of stillness to listen to your life. Now, that may be really difficult for many of us in this room, but I need you to know it is imperative. Anytime I encounter someone who says, I'm burned out, I always start with, first, where the text started, have you drank water today? Have you had rest today? At basics. Then I always move to, tell me the last time you had a brief moment of silence. Just pause. Silence. Here's what I know. Our lives are speaking. The question is, are we listening? My experience, wisdom whispers, it rarely shouts. My experience, the Spirit nudges, it rarely pushes. And so what the writer is inviting us into is a moment to pause, silence, to get above the noise, to engage the emotions, thoughts, senses, images, and ideas that are arising within you. I had this experience recently when I went to the desert. I'd never been in the desert before. Every time my wife and I have a moment to break, vacation, whatever, we always go to the ocean. That's our thing. There's something about the water to me. Oh, I mean, it's so therapeutic. So I go get in the water and I just float. And sometimes while I'm floating, I am Elijah going, God, if I'm going to die, take me now. You know what I mean? Like, if you ever hear about me drowning in the Atlantic, just be like, dude, he was so happy. He was so happy. Okay. But then one day my wife was like, we should try the desert. And I'm like, that sounds awful. And I have friends that live like in Arizona and Utah and different places. I'm just like, the desert sounds terrible. Like, there's just nothing there. It's dry. I want dry. Like, that doesn't sound like a good time. But where we were in California at the time, she was just like, well, the forecast is rain. So if you want the desert, you need to go to Palm Springs. And I'm like, I've never heard. The only thing I knew about Palm Springs was Elvis lived there. So I was like, well, let's go to Palm Springs, I guess. So we went to Palm Springs. And then Katie's like, you ever heard of this place called Joshua Tree? I was like, you two sing about it. And she's like, we need to go there. And I was like, all right. So I just tell you this, we're driving into the desert. And it's the first time I'd ever seen the desert. And I can't explain this to you. It caught me off guard, but my internal chatter, at the less trees, traffic, and noise, I'm telling you, the exterior began to shape my interior. The internal chatter actually started slowing down. And then we went into Joshua Tree, and I just told Katie, I was like, I need a minute, 2 minutes, because I cannot recall ever being in a location where I couldn't see a building. And I think, do we have that photo? I don't know if it's on there or not, but I took a photo. There it is. So I stood right there for a while because I'm like, two things. Number one, there are no buildings. Number two, there was no other humans. Now, as an introvert, that's heaven. If you want to know what I think heaven looks like, it's that right there. When I die and get to heaven, if no one's there, I'm going to be like, yes, finally, I'm here. Now, if I die and there's a whole bunch of people there, I'm going to be like, this isn't heaven, it's hell. But I sat on a rock. I just sat on a rock. And I can't explain this to you, but the desert was one of the most refreshing places I'd ever been in my life. And that seems like a weird word for a place that's dry, right? Refreshing. But there was something that it did in my psyche, my mind, my soul, my body. It's like it brought up just here's the word, a peace. And I just sat in it. And I got so much clarity. And here's the clarity that I got. You don't have to go to the desert to get clarity. This experience can happen right in the heart of the city. But it's never going to happen if you don't pause and take intentional, frequent moments in your week to have silence. When I say that, I mean stop the podcast. This is my push. Stop the podcast. Hit pause, not stop on Taylor Swift. Just pause. Stop the music. Pause it all. And it may be a lot, but just give it 2 minutes. Start with 1. Start with 30 seconds. Now, for many people, that's eerie. You're like, you're already getting nervous. And part of the nervous is because it's new for you. And maybe you're scared because you're like, I don't know that I want to know what questions are arising within me. Yeah. So we stop. We pause. Our friend Rob said it like this: stress and exhaustion and being overwhelmed, those feelings have come to tell you the truth about your life. We don't avoid the truth or try to outwork it or outrun it. We stop and we listen to it. If we want to give up, we take that serious. That's our body and heart and spirit telling us something is off. We follow that despair all the way back to its cave. It has come to show us that we aren't aligned, that we've got too much going on. And so I just say to you, pause, stop. If you're anxious and anxiety is ruling your life like it has in my life, I didn't get underneath it until I stopped and said, something's not right here. And if you're constantly tired, pause. And then we don't just stop for stopping. We stop so the chatter can end, and then we listen. We feel for the nudge. We listen for the questions that arise within us. And then here's the trick. Elijah doesn't just stop. He listens to the question, and then check it out. The questions arise, and then he engages the questions. Now, that is the work I want to be about in the world. So here is the question for him. What are you doing here? What are you doing here? And Elijah begins to engage the question. You know what he's doing, metaphorically speaking? The question arises, and that question can come internally. It can also come from therapist or whatever you've ever been. It can come from a pastor. Check that out, all right? But they can ask you a question, and all of a sudden you're like, and here's what we're doing. The only thing we're doing is we're trying to open the gate for you to get underneath the fatigue. And so Elijah starts getting underneath it, and he just starts going. And remember, he's in a cave. He's in solitude by himself. And he starts getting underneath it, and he's like, I'll tell you why. Because I feel like I'm alone. Why do you feel like you're alone? And he just starts going through. So here's the word. You interview yourself. Interview yourself. Interview your experiences. Interview your emotions. Ask questions to your soul. Ask the questions your soul has been avoiding. What am I feeling? Where do I feel it? Do I feel it here in my gut? That matters. Where do you feel fatigue? Some of you are like, I'm tired all over my body. Great. That's a good place to start. Where do you feel it? Now, this translates for me with anxiety. I have 2 places specifically where I feel my anxiety. I know where they're located in my body. That matters to me. Okay? Same with fatigue, right? How did it get here? When did it happen? Where did it happen? And why did it happen? Now, there are lots of reasons, and you'll keep discovering new layers and new patterns every time you have moments of pause. But the hope is that it will lead you into an investigation and an interview of your own soul. So here's some questions that maybe I can give you that will help you a little bit, okay? So I'm just kind of stirring this up here. It's not on the screen, but here it is. Have you taken on things that weren't yours to take on? And then that leads to another question. Why do you keep taking on things that aren't yours to take on? I know some of you are like, I don't like it. Perhaps maybe the reason you're taking on things that aren't yours to take on is because you aren't clear on what your work is to do in the world. Are you tired because you can't say no and because you don't know how to operate boundaries? That leads to other questions. Where do you need to set boundaries to protect your energies? Are you tired because you are enslaved to what others think of you? You don't want to appear lazy or weak or like a quitter because you want to appear strong and important and committed. Well, my question to you would be, why are you giving others so much power over your life? Are you a grown adult that's still seeking the approval, validation, and acceptance of others? Do you feel like you don't have all you need or you aren't enough, and that's why you're still seeking the validation from others? Because that's a question of identity. And there might be some childhood wounds in there that we need to work through. Yeah. Are you tired because you're overscheduled? How did becoming busy become a badge in our society? 9 out of 10 text. What you doing this week? This is busy. I always just send the emoji back, just the exhausted emoji. Oh God. But isn't there something underneath that? Like don't we all kind of like it because it gives our deepest identity a sense of importance. I'm needed. The world, hey, it won't function without me. Oh, that's nice. Here's a question. Is your life sustainable? Is your life demanding more from you right now than you can actually give? Oh, here's another one. Are you exhausted because of your family dynamics? The people you hang out with that call themselves friends, real question, do they drain you? Are you giving more than you're receiving? How much information are you intaking? Are you intaking unhealthy, unnecessary information? And if you are, how much of that is creating your fatigue? Oh, here's one. Is your job draining you? So let's get into that, because if your job's draining you, then we need to talk about maybe why. Did it just start draining you? Has it always been draining you? Is it the new boss? Is it the hours? Yeah. Or is it the setup in general? This was that way when I started working at Bindings Lake over 10 years ago. I took the job, and when I took it, I don't remember how many staff members we had. I do know before I came in, we released a couple staff members because they asked me, they were like, "You're the pastor now. What's our first move?" And I just said, "We got to get rid of those people." You know what I mean? And part of the reason was because very quickly I realized this is unsustainable for a church like ours. Like, you can't have 12 full-time staff. Like, that's never going to work, right? And then the other part was because when I came in, I sat down with all of them and I said, "Hey, this is going to be a place that is same-sex affirming." And I realized real quickly after talking to some of the staff members, one of them was like, "Yeah, I can't be at a place like that." Well, great. That means you can't work here. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. So here's the thing. When I got in, though, they handed me the organization. You know what I mean? They're like, "Here you go." Right? And I grab it and I'm like, "Okay." And then as like a new guy, you start looking at everything going, "Okay." And then it's my first time pastoring, so I didn't know what I was doing. So I was like, well, so the only thing I knew to do was look at all the other places and how they operate. That's what we do, right? You go to someone who's doing well. But then I looked at them and I'm like, I don't really like the way they're doing it. It's like, so what would be like my way of doing it? And some things just felt non-negotiable at the beginning. And now when I look back as like 44 now, 10 years later, I wish I'd had a little more courage early on, because I just felt like I had to do what we were always doing. So one of those things was we have a full-time staff and we meet in the office from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. every single day. Well, I realized real quickly, that I do not function well sitting in an office with one window all day long. Can we just talk about this? Talk about killing creativity. Throw me in a room that has one window and they're like, now push out some creative teachings. I'm like, yeah, real quickly my teachings were like, life is terrible, then you die. So I just started asking questions going, hey guys, just real quick, why are we all here? Literally, I got up in staff meeting on Tuesday, like, why are we all here? And they're all like, because we're on a mission for the Lord. Great. So the Lord's stuck in these little cubicles? Like, get out of here. And I asked them, I was like, can you do your work from home? They're like, yeah. And it occurred to me, like, oh my God, why do we do none of it? Because that's what they pay us to do. Who's paying us? And so we have a boss, and who's the boss? And who's the boss? The boss says we have to be here. And who even knows when we're here or not here, right? And then people are like, you can't do that. You have to have a full-time staff in the office 9 to 5. That's just the way it is. And then check it out. COVID happened. That's just the way it is. And all of a sudden I realized, oh, we're never going back. And I'll tell you why. Because, check it out, the creativity soared. The fatigue lessened. I have a theory. Part of the reason many of us are feeling fatigue right now is because we have transitioned from COVID back to post-COVID. And our bodies are shrinking again. Our souls are suffocating again. But leave it to this administration. Get back to the office. We're dying. Yeah. What if you took your laptop and went outside? It's little things like that. What if you did your work in the sunshine? Yes. Yeah. How intentional are you with your energies, your time, your space? Is there something out of alignment with your values? I can't tell you how quickly you get fatigued if you have integrity problems with your values. So if you say you believe one thing, but then you live another way, that's draining. Elijah knew this, that the public persona and then the private reality weren't lining up in his life. That's draining. Yeah, we need airtight integrity. And then I want to ask you this. Do you realize how much power you actually have over your life? What if I told you you have more power than you realize to control your life? And here's the thing. You get to create the world that you live in. You do. Now, there's some things that are non-negotiable. Get it. But a lot of things in life you get to have a say in. Right? So we stop there and I just ask this. How many of us keep repeating the same old patterns? Same fights with the spouse over and over like we've never learned anything. Same frustrations. Well, I'm just frustrated. Have you ever had that frustration before? Every week. Same exhaustion. I'm just tired. Dude, you're always tired. Is everything okay? How many of us keep repeating the same old patterns, wondering why we always end up here? And I would just say maybe it's because we rarely stop and ask why we are stuck. Repeating patterns do not break them. What breaks them is when you stop, pause, and ask why. Awareness of the pattern breaks the pattern. So if you can just become aware that you're in a cycle, you pause, that awareness has now broke the cycle, but in that moment of breaking it, you start interviewing it. Why do I keep repeating this? Why is this a theme? You guys have themes over and over in your life? What is it trying to tell me? So it's being quiet, it's listening. Now, one quick political statement for TikTok, and then and then a benediction, okay? A benediction. All right? And I'm working this one out. I'm going to do it personally today after the service too, but I'm working this one out. But I mention all this to just say, this week is a perfect example. This week I was intaking my weekly news, and I real quickly found the statement that our president made about Ukraine and his desire to go to heaven. I'm just curious. Anybody see that? Anybody see his desire? Okay, great. Okay. So for those of you that haven't, he was on, apparently there's a show called Fox and Friends. And he's on Fox and Friends, and they ask him about Zelensky coming in and Putin coming in, and they're, how'd these meetings go? And then he said, quote, "If I can save 7,000 people a week from being killed in Ukraine, I think that's pretty good. I want to try to get to heaven if possible. I'm hearing that I'm not doing well." He said, "I'm at the bottom of the totem pole. But if I can get to heaven, this will be one of the reasons," unquote. Pause. My little inner evangelical child was like, oh, this is good. No, my inner evangelical child was like, "Friend, you need to read Paul. It's not of works, lest anyone should boast. Place your faith and trust in Jesus and repent of your sin," right? Like that's my evangelical. And then I paused, and then I moved from the evangelical Cody to, we're getting a window. Now, I don't know, some of you don't have the capacity to look inside the window. I get it. But we're getting a window into the internal universe of the commander-in-chief here. And now, I'm going to be honest, I approached it cautiously. So I'm like, I don't know that I want to see what's in there. You know what I mean? But I realized we have a 79-year-old man who is now, maybe for the first time, starting to think about his mortality. Well, isn't this interesting? Because one of the things I know about life is you can make the art of the deal with everybody, but you cannot make the art of the deal with Almighty God. Right? And it's interesting because we have a president who is trying to do quid pro quo with the divine. Like, I'll do this for you if you do this for me. I'll save 7,000 lives if you can give me life insurance on the other side. What I want to say, first of all, Mr. President, first of all, if you're watching, get to work. Get to work. Second, that's not how it works. My understanding of the divine is that God has never been about transactions. God has been about transformation. You can't make deals with God. God is not here to make deals with you. God is here to transform the very essence of your being. And I pause, and I thought, one thing I can say about Trump in this moment that is admiring is maybe for the first time, guess what? A question has arisen in his soul that he's having troubles answering. And I would just encourage him to lean in to that question. What could it be saying? Because it's that little gentle nudge that is the way Spirit speaks. And so, here's the thing. We know this. All conversations about the afterlife are speculation. Nobody knows what's going to happen when we die. And I need to say that again publicly. Nobody knows what happens when we die. Not even the biblical authors agree on it. There's no consensus in the Bible on what happens when we die. They're all over the place. And here's another thing. They barely even talk about the afterlife in the Scripture. Why? Because they just weren't that interested in it. But a lot of evangelicals, including Trump, it's everything. Faith has become an escape plan, a ticket out of here, rather than an invitation to engage and transform the world now. And so the obsession with getting to heaven later has become a convenient way to ignore the problems in this life. And for Jesus, heaven wasn't some dreamy, floating afterlife. Heaven was a realm where wholeness and justice and flourishing and harmony was here in the moment, in that domain. Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is here. It's among us. It's within us. Oh, and we should add, hell. Jesus was never talking about eternal torture somewhere else. He was warning about the real hell we create here from our greed, injustice, corruption, and indifference. When I heard Trump make this statement, I was reminded of the parable in Luke 16. If you're unfamiliar with that parable, a rich man ignores a poor man at his gate. They die, and the roles are reversed. The poor man is comforted, and the rich man finds himself in flames in Hades, begging the poor man to bring him water. I don't believe this story is a map or a description of the afterlife. I believe it's a warning about our actions right now. It is a confrontation about the economic injustice of the first century. I bring all that to your attention to say, Mr. Trump wants heaven when he dies, but he's creating real hell while he lives. And what I want to say to him is, you cannot sow seeds of hell now and expect a harvest of heaven later. And so my advice to you would be to turn around. The prophets called it repentance. Because, friend, the path that you are headed down does not lead to heaven. And the reason I say that with authority is because heaven is not about there and then. Hell is not about there and then. It's here and now. And I've seen the fruits of the path you are taking our country in, and it is producing hell for the marginalized, the outcast, and the alone. And what I would say to you is that you need to turn around on your path. Move away from the billionaires and start moving toward those on the underside. Because if you want Christ to save you, Christ stands before you in the homeless that you're moving out of D.C. Christ stands before you in the starving kids in Gaza. Christ stands before you with the widow that no longer has health care. Christ stands before you in the immigrant that you are pushing out of this country. And I would also just say, I do have good news for you, Mr. President. Unlike the borders of the United States, where you keep out the marginalized, the outcast, and the alone, John of Patmos tells us in Revelation, the gates of heaven are always open. And the invitation is given. And friend, grace is present. And you can turn. And you can come home. The worst of sinners can come home. That's how giant this expansive love of God actually is. Now, got worked up. Let's end here. A quote with Frederick Buechner. He wrote a book called Listening to Your Life. By the way, if you want little daily inspirations, it's an older book, but God, it's fantastic. Like if you're like, I don't really have time to read a lot, get this book, Listening to Your Life, and every day he has a couple little words. It's fantastic. Okay, so Frederick Buechner said this. I love this. He said, literature, painting, music, the most basic lesson that all art teaches us is to stop. Look and listen to life on this planet, including our own lives, as a vastly richer, deeper, and more mysterious business than most of the time it ever occurs to us to suspect, as we bumble along from day to day on automatic pilot. Yeah. May you not go through your week again on automatic pilot, but may you stop, be intentional, get a moment, go to the backyard, walk the dog without a podcast, and just feel, listen, sense the gentle nudge of where Spirit might be leading you.